Welcome to the Assessor Training, Part 1. I am the course tutor and my name is Sarah Beard, and I will be taking you through this session, and we will first of all be looking at the role of the assessor. The session outcomes for Part 1 are as follows. You will be able to describe the role of the assessor and the centre policies. The role of the assessor involves marking students' work and returning this to them, usually electronically. You need to take receipt of their assignment folders, including video of your students' access arrangements assessment. You need to observe and assess the videoed assessment against the specified criteria, and we will be looking at that criteria later in this session. You need to record the outcome on the marking grids, and you will receive your students' written assignments by email and feedback electronically using the prescribed method. And again, we will cover this later in this session. You also need to ensure that you keep a thorough record of your students' progress, and we have documentation to enable you to do this. You need to mark all the assessments, record the feedback on the appropriate forms, and provide Include Ed with an electronic copy of such documentation. And this is archived within a Dropbox, which you would be provided access to. And you will need to return the work to the student or the office as required. Most of the work is sent to you electronically, so you are returning it by email. But there will be possible test papers, video that your student sends to you. And I say possible because there is the facility to actually scan that in, and I will talk about that later on. But at the end of the course, we do need these test forms and the videoed assessment in hard format. So there will be some postage that comes to your home. Include Ed will of course reimburse any postage costs that you incur. And if you are returning work to students by post, we do ask that you send it second class signed for or tracked courier. It's easier to use a courier if it's a heavy portfolio because it is much more efficient and less expensive than second class post. You need to ensure that you respond to your student inquiries, any inquiries or emails you have from the Internal Quality Assurer, known as the IQA, and the course manager promptly within 72 hours. There may be occasions when you can't act upon what you've been asked, you can't reply to the query, or you need to find out more information. That's absolutely fine. Just respond to the person sending the email, giving them an idea of when you will be going back to them. We ask that any work sent to you is marked within 10 days, except in exceptional circumstances. Obviously, if you're on leave or have other reasons that you can't mark work, then that's absolutely fine, but do make us aware of that. But normally, you receive an assignment from a student, you should ensure that it is returned to them with feedback within a 10-day period. If you are on holiday or leave, please let the course manager know, and she will also let your Internal Quality Assurer, your IQA, know. We ask our assessors to provide telephone or Skype tutorials to their students if required. Now, some students might be absolutely fine, very strong. They might not need any tutorials at all, and others might need a little more support. And generally, you would provide a tutorial for a piece of work that has been submitted that you have had to give quite a substantial amount of feedback on, and perhaps the student doesn't quite understand your feedback, or you feel that they will progress better by actually talking through the feedback with them. And on average, we say that's around an hour per unit, so 2 hours per student. What you will find once you have a caseload of students is, say for example, 3 of the students don't require any tutorials at all, but another student is much weaker, she may require some additional tutorials. So you're looking at averaging this across your caseload. But a general rule of thumb is that we allocate in the fee, or we expect for the fee, at least one tutorial per unit per student. But they are not compulsory, and certainly there's no point giving a tutorial if the student doesn't require that. You need to make your IQA aware of any problems that your students are experiencing so that action can be taken. So this could be problems with the course, or it could be personal problems you've been informed of, or maybe work-related issues as well. You also need to make the IQA and the course manager aware of any student who is not submitting work regularly. And because this is an online course and we have very flexible deadlines, students do submit at very different pace from each other. So if you, for example, get allocated a student and you mark her first assignment and you then don't hear from her again for several weeks, we do ask you to check with the student first of all, how are you getting on? And we ask you to check every 2 weeks if you haven't heard from a student. But if there's no response, then you should let the course manager know. Sometimes students submit the first couple of assignments and then they become what we would refer to as static. For whatever reason, they don't continue submitting regularly. And sometimes it is better for us to remove those students from your cohort of students, your caseload, and put them onto a static list so that you can take on a student who is submitting regularly. And obviously if that happens, then we do prorata your fee accordingly. So it's really all about communication. Make sure you keep your IQA aware of any problems the student is experiencing, and you keep your course manager aware of any student who is not submitting regularly or that you are having problems contacting. We asked assessors to take responsibility for their own CPD. Obviously, if you have AMDA or APC, you will need to be completing a CPD log on either a 3-yearly or 5-yearly basis, I think it is for AMDA, and they can be submitted to us. And we do prefer our assessors to hold APC or AMDA accreditation, but we can waiver that requirement in exceptional circumstances. When you update your APCs or your AMDA, please send copies of the new certificates so we can update them on our file. Each September, we ask you to submit a CPD log to us, and that is because our awarding body, Industry Qualifications, usually visit in the November of each year, and they will ask to see what CPD each of our assessors has completed. Now, if you do have AMDA or APC accreditation, if you are adding to your log on an annual basis, then that's absolutely fine. Just send us your log and we can use that. But what we wouldn't expect is to see the log if you were, say, 2 years since you'd updated your APC and you haven't updated it since. We don't want you to send us the log that you submitted to PATOS 2 years ago. Obviously it could be PATOS or BDA or Dyslexia Action. Just keep it up to date. If you do not hold APC or AMDA, then we just need you to send us a list of what CPD you have undertaken for that year. And please remember that that is not just courses you've attended, it's maybe webinars, books you've read, videos you've watched on YouTube possibly related to access arrangements, or testing, journals that you've read. So there's a whole range of activities that you can log as CPD. We do ask all our assessors to complete Communicate Ed update training each September, and you can either do this online, and we don't charge for that place, or you can attend a venue. If you attend one of the venues, there will be a small charge for the additional cost over and above what it would be to undertake the course online. Each month, our course manager sends out a newsletter, and this consists of a newsletter for assessors and a newsletter for students. It is really important that you do read that newsletter and you file it so that you can refer back to it. It might also be an idea that if it relates to a specific assignment or something that's in your handbook, that you actually go to your handbook and just make a little note that there has been a specific change. And this just enables us to feedback and communicate regularly to our team. We try to keep changes to a minimum, but any changes we are making are usually for improvement of the course and improvement of communications as well. So please do read the newsletter and ensure that any points on there are actioned. We use a variety of tools to communicate to our assessors and students. Google Groups is where you will receive emails from your senior IQA, the quality manager. You will also receive emails from the course manager via Google Groups, and that's how we send out the newsletter. We have a Facebook forum, which I have to say is predominantly used by students. Now, it is not compulsory to use this Facebook forum. If you are not a Facebook user, do not feel that you have to sign up for Facebook. We fully respect that some people do not want to be on social media such as Facebook. But if you are a Facebook user, you simply have to go to the page and like it, and you will get the news feed from that. And it's quite good to see the type of questions that students are asking. We obviously email you directly, and the monthly newsletter I have mentioned already. When you have been allocated a student, you need to introduce yourself by email. Now, one of the things that I would recommend here is that when you introduce yourself, you tell them a little about yourself, your current role, etc. But make it very clear that you don't work full-time on the PAPA course, you don't work full-time for Include Ed, and that you will be marking their work on whatever specific days you have set aside for them. It's important that you set the boundaries early on. I would also recommend, and this is just something from personal experience, and it's absolutely, you don't have to follow this recommendation at all, but I've delivered a number of accredited courses over the years, and I've always had my emails on my phone because it makes life easy, and I've got into the habit of replying to emails at all times of the day. I may reply to one when I'm in the supermarket, I may reply to one when I'm sitting in bed, or first thing in the morning when I wake up at 6. And what I've found is that by doing that over the years, as soon as you start that with a student, they tend to expect it. So if Sally Bloggs emails you at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, and previously you've replied to her answers at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, she will probably be a little disgruntled if the next time you don't reply. So my recommendation would be that you set very clear boundaries early on, and that you deal with your emails at set times if possible, just so that students understand how you work, and that way you don't become overburdened throughout the week with emails from your students. When you are allocated a student, you will also be sent an individual learning plan, which we refer to as an ILP. And the course manager will have completed some parts already on this, and you then need to go to your student and, in conjunction with your student, complete the other parts. And this will need to be kept up to date throughout the course. We will look at this further in the presentation. It does, as well, as it says here, have to be contained within the student's final portfolio. And it is really important that we do keep it up to date and we do have it in that final portfolio, because it is a requirement of our awarding body. Student allocation. Students are allocated when they have watched some of the early videos, and also when they are ready to submit their first assignment for Unit 1.1. Until that point in time, we allow them to work without the assistance of an assessor, because we have found that some students take quite a long time to get through the early videos. So by actually asking them to contact us when they get to this point, we can assure that when we allocate a student to an assessor, they do have work ready for the assessor to mark. I'd like you now to complete an action point. I would like you to pause the video and find the following documents within the Assessor Handbook: making contact with your student and managing communications, and the individual learning plan. So please pause the presentation and read those documents. I would like you now to complete another action point. In the Assessor Handbook, I would like you to find the section that contains the centre policies. These are quite lengthy. You might not want to read them all in depth at the moment, but take a few minutes to look through the policies and familiarise yourself with the policies. In this part of the presentation, we are going to provide you with an overview of the course. In the session outcomes, you will understand the format of the PAPA course. The PAPA course consists of 2 units, and we are going to start by looking at Unit 1. This is called Understanding the Principles of Psychometric Testing, and it provides students with an introduction to the principles of educational testing and the administration of standardised tests suitable for use in assessments for access arrangements. We have a number of featured tests which the students watch on the online learning environment, and these include ART, BPVS 3, CTOP 2, DASH, Dyslexia Portfolio, DRA 2, GALT 5, SDMT, TOML 2, TOWRY 2, WIAT 2T, RAML 2, RAT 4, RIT, YARC and AAB. But of course, as new tests are added, we will video these and add them to the featured tests. I'd like you now to complete an action point, and you will need the Student Assignment Handbook for this action point. And I'd like you to find the Unit 1 Assignment Overview, read the overview thoroughly and make a note of any questions that you have. These questions can then be emailed to the course manager, who will pass the appropriate member of staff, and that member of staff will answer your question. However, you may also find that some of your questions are answered as you progress through this training session. So please pause the video now. So you will see that the Unit 1 Assignment Overview provides learning outcomes, assessment criteria, and a description of what the assignment contains. So we'll just have a brief look at these together now. So if you look at Learning Outcome 1, that is to understand the theoretical basis underlying psychometric testing within access arrangements. And the assessment criteria they have to meet is to be able to critically evaluate different types of tests, such as standardised tests, criterion referenced, norm referenced and curriculum based tests. They also have to describe certain terms: reliability, validity, normal distribution, standard deviation, discrepancy, deficit, standard score, percentile, age equivalent score, and they have to explain the normal distribution curve. So Assessment criteria 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3 are met through 2 assignments. And the assignments are in the grey shaded boxes. So assignment 1.1, they have to complete a question sheet which allows them to demonstrate their knowledge of the statistical terms and different types of testing. So that actually addresses all 3 of the assessment criteria. They also need to complete an online questionnaire, and this addresses assessment criteria 1.2 and 1.3. If we look next at assessment criteria 1.4, we will see that here they have to accurately and consistently calculate standard scores for confidence bands, and they have an exercise where they have to complete those confidence bands and scan it to you to mark, and there's an answer sheet for that. We then look at learning outcome 2, and learning outcome 2 is to be able to achieve proficiency in administering and scoring standardised tests for attainment and cognitive processing. So the tests that we would use fundamentally for an exam access arrangements assessment. They do this through planning an assessment, doing an assessment and scoring the results, and then finally analysing the results. So assessment criteria 2.1 is develop an assessment plan, and you can see that the assignment is detailed within the grey shaded boxes. It has only to be brief, but it does need to be accurate. Assessment criteria 2.2, they have to provide a rationale for the range of tests used. And they don't have to relate this specifically to their student, but they do need to say which test they are using and what they're measuring, explain why they want to measure this, and how the scores of these tests can be used for access arrangements, and also link it into what is known about students with a specific learning difficulty in an examination setting. So for example, with the CTOP, they would obviously be administering the rapid naming subtests, and below average scores on those could be used as core evidence for extra time. And they would then want to link that in with why in an exam does a student with dyslexia need extra time based on those scores. So they would want to talk about phonological processing speed, etc. Assessment criteria 2.3 is administer a range of cognitive and attainment tests for the chosen candidate. And this is where they actually administer the assessment. And again, the details are contained within the grey shaded box. Assessment criteria 2.4 is the scoring of those tests which they have actually administered. Demonstrate the ability to consistently score the tests with 100% accuracy. And again, the details of the actual assignment are contained within the grey shaded boxes. And the final learning outcome for Unit 1 is learning outcome 3, to be able to evaluate the findings of an assessment, recommend and justify appropriate access arrangements. Assessment criteria 3.1 is to critically evaluate the history of need and provision through the production of a case history. And the assignment asks them to produce a case history to show history of need and provision for the candidate chosen for their videoed assessment. Background evidence should be compiled through discussion with school, college, access to SEM records, and communication with the candidate and parents and carers. They can include anonymised copies of notes and records if they want to, but this is not compulsory. It then provides a recommended layout for the report. Assessment criteria 3.2 is where they analyse the results from the actual assessment. Compile a brief report of the assessment data, converting standard scores to percentile scores and age equivalent scores where appropriate. assessment criteria 3.3, demonstrate accuracy in reporting the data. So we're looking to make sure that they are carrying the scores over accurately from the test papers, and that they can relate that to what access arrangements are suitable for that student. And that's really covered in assessment criteria 3.4. Systematically analyse the findings and justify the choice of arrangements that you recommend. So assignment 3.2, 3.3 and 3.4, it addresses all of those three criteria within the one assignment. So it is the report of the assessment data and the analysis of that data and the recommendations for access arrangements. I would like you now to complete another action point. I would like you to find in the Student Assignment Handbook the guidelines for choosing your candidate and take a few minutes to read through the guidance. We don't prescribe what specific tests students should use, but they should be up to date. And the following tests are now considered out of date: the Group and Individual Assessment of Writing Speed by Penny Alcock, Digit Memory, that's the Turner and Ridsdale Digit Memory Test, and CTOT 1 and TOWRY 1. Tests obviously should have a ceiling above the age of the candidate. Over-testing should be avoided. So, for example, they only need one reading comprehension test. They don't need to put two different tests into the assessment. For the purpose of the PAPA assessment, the following tests should not be used. Dyslexia Portfolio can only be used for digits forwards and backwards. And the Lucid Exact cannot be used alone. And the reason that we ask students not to use the Lucid Exact is simply because we need to see their ability to administer paper tests. And the Dyslexia Portfolio is a screening test that is only suitable up to, I think it's 1611. However, if they wanted to use the digits memory from that test, Dyslexia Portfolio, as a supplementary evidence, that would be fine. Where should the videoed assessments for the PAPA take place? Assessments will usually take place in the student's school or college. If there is a reason why an assessment cannot take place at the school or college, the student should discuss this situation with their assessor. However, before an alternative venue is agreed, the assessor should ensure that the candidate has gained the approval of the parent and, where appropriate, the school or college. Assessors should then always confirm the suitability of the venue with their IQA. I would like you now to complete an action point. I would like you to find two documents in the Student Assignment Handbook: Guidelines for Planning the Assessment and Assessing Your Candidate. These are really core documents, so do read these thoroughly. The guidelines discusses what they should be testing, what areas. It also talks about our library of tests that they can borrow tests from. And administering and scoring standardised tests is what's covered in Assessing Your Candidate, and that tells them about how to fill in their test papers and also talks about how to conduct the actual videoed assessment. So please pause the presentation while you take a few minutes to look through this document. There will be occasions when a student has administered the test well and scored the test papers with 100% accuracy, but unfortunately the student they've chosen doesn't qualify for access arrangements. In that case, they have to use a simulated case study and follow this procedure. They complete the assignments 3.2 to 3.4 using their candidate scores. So they're actually writing up the scores and analysing that. And then In the recommendations, they need to explain why he is not eligible for exam access arrangements. Once that is completed, they will have completed Unit 1. But in Unit 2, there are 2 linked assignments to their candidate. So they will then need to use the simulated case study for a student called Oliver, and they will use that to complete the Form 8 for him, which is 4.1, and the Access Arrangements Online application for 4.2. We are now going to look at the course format for Unit 2, Assessing for Access Arrangements. And this covers understanding the Joint Council for Qualifications, Regulations, Access Arrangements and Reasonable Adjustments, and applying them within their centre. It also covers the rationale for access arrangements, types of access arrangements. I would like you now to complete an action point. Find the Student Assignment Handbook and look at the Assignment Overview Unit 2. Read the overview thoroughly and make a note of any questions you have. These can be emailed to the course manager, who will pass the appropriate member of staff. So please pause the presentation now and complete this action point. So hopefully that has given you an overview of Unit 2. I'm just going to talk through that briefly with you. So Unit 2, Learning Outcome 1. To understand the rationale for and impact of access arrangements in the light of the ethical and privacy issues related to statutory regulations, including the Equalities Act. So Assessment Criteria 1.1 is critically analyse the rationale behind access arrangements and the impact on several statutory regulations, including the Equalities Act. And you will see that in the grey shaded boxes, it talks about how to present this assignment, which is fundamentally an essay. Assessment Criteria 1.2 is another essay, and the criteria is demonstrate an awareness of ethical issues and data protection. And in the grey shaded box, it explains how to complete this assignment. Learning Outcome 2 is know how to identify and assess learners who may require exam access arrangements through the interpretation of data provided by the centre. Assessment Criteria 2.1 explain how to collate, interpret evidence and carry out further testing to identify learners who may require access arrangements in general qualifications. Assignment 2.1 is explained in the grey shaded box, but they have to analyse data of 20 students and make recommendations for access arrangements and further testing based on that data.
Assessment Criteria 2.2. They have to write a summary evaluating tests for the age group in which they work. And they have to select tests which cover reading accuracy, reading comprehension, writing speed, spelling and processing speed. Comment on the age range, whether they are for group or individual administration, the format of each test, how it is administered and its uses for assessment for access arrangements. Now this is slightly different to what they did for the rationale, because in the rationale in Unit 1 they are writing about the tests that they are using. This could be different tests, and they also in this have to comment on how it is administered and whether it's suitable for group or individual administration. In addition, they have to choose 2 tests to look at in more detail and comment on the validity and reliability. And we expect this to be around 1,000 words, but it could be slightly more. That's not a problem. We're not very strict on word count, but it does have to have a reference list and a bibliography. Learning Outcome 3 is to be able to describe access arrangements appropriate for particular candidates. And Assessment Criteria 3.1 describe the range of access arrangements available, including those that require processing through AAO, and for those for which no prior approval is needed. And the assignment asks them to complete an online questionnaire and they are asked 40 questions, randomly selected from a bank of 60, and the pass mark is 80%. So that is an assignment they complete on their own and you don't have to mark. Assessment criteria 3.2 is critically and systematically assess the most suitable arrangements for particular candidates. And the assignment requires them to use 4 case studies provided and analyse the data given and make recommendations for the appropriate access arrangements. And of those 4 case studies, 2 of them clearly do need access arrangements, and 2 they need to think a little bit more in depth about and consider whether there is the appropriate evidence on file and history of need.
Assessment criteria 3.3 is similar. Describe the arrangements that are available for candidates with physical and sensory needs. And in assignment 3.3, they again have to look at case studies and make recommendations for access arrangements. Learning outcome 4 is to be able to record the evidence and apply for access arrangements through Access Arrangements Online, AAO. Assessment criteria 4.1 demonstrate the ability to record the evidence on a Form 8, and they are completing Form 8 for their own candidate and also some of the case studies. 4.2 is demonstrate how to process applications through Access Arrangements Online, and they will be using the Form 8s, so it will be the same candidates that they are using. 4.3 assessment criteria explain the documentation that is required as evidence to support the application. And in 4.3 they have to list what evidence is required. That's quite straightforward. Learning outcome 5 is to be aware of the roles, responsibilities and systems required for the smooth running of the access arrangements process within the school and college. And there's only one assessment criteria for learning outcome 5, and that's demonstrate an ability to train centre staff involved in access arrangements. And this is usually completed towards the end of the course, and as the assignment overview in the grey shaded boxes explains, they can use Communicate Ed materials for this, so they don't have to make their own PowerPoints. I'd like you now to complete another action point. If you have not done so already, I would like you to watch the assignment guidance video before you progress with the rest of this training. We are going to now have a look at how to mark your students' work. By the end of the session, you will be able to describe how to mark the students' work, how to complete the paperwork, how to check the portfolio before submission to the IQA. So when is work submitted? Well, the PAPA course is designed to take approximately 9 months, and we don't give students exact deadlines. Now, within the ILP, you can see there is a place to record deadlines, and you can work with your student to put some deadlines in, and it's often helpful for those students to have an overview. However, it is fundamentally up to the student as to when they send the work, and deadlines are relatively fluid. However, there are a couple of deadlines which must be adhered to. First of all, the assessment plan has to be complete before the videoed assessment. It has to be 100% complete. Otherwise, obviously, they would go off and maybe put in the wrong choice of test, etc. So that has to be complete. We do say the rationale should be complete before the videoed assessment, but there is a little bit of flexibility there, and so long as it's in draft format, we would be happy for the student to assess. Once the student has completed their videoed assessment, the film, the video, and the marked papers should be with you within 2 weeks. So, for example, if they assess a student, let's say on the 14th of May, that should be with you by the 28th of May. And that's good practice in any establishment, that when you assess someone, you write the results up pretty quick. The remainder of Unit 1 and 2, there is more flexibility with, and the work will get emailed to you, hopefully at regular times. We've discussed already, if work doesn't come through regularly, you should let your course manager know. And I would just recommend that once you've had a draft piece of work, you then put a deadline on for returning it to you. And I usually give the student at least a weekend and a week. So what I mean by that is I usually would give them perhaps around 10 days. So they've got time to work on that. Again, it's relatively fluid, but it does help students to see, right, I've got this piece of work back. It focuses them. My assessor needs it back on X date. And it helps you to plan your workload as well. The portfolios, the final portfolios, and currently we're using electronic portfolios. You may have a couple of students who have been on the course a while and will still submit hard copies of portfolios, but most students now have moved over to electronic portfolios. They should be with you roughly within 2 weeks of completing the course. I'd like you now to complete an action point. I would like you to find in the Assessor Handbook the marking grid for Unit 1 and the marking grid for the videoed assessment. Familiarise yourself with these grids. So the paperwork you should complete for Unit 1 is as follows. The marking grid for Unit 1, which is the grid for the whole of the unit, and the marking grid for the videoed assessment. And there should be a student and assessor signature on both. Now, it is sufficient to put in a typed signature on these documents because at the end of the course, they will be signing in hard format a portfolio declaration. When emailing work to you, students should follow the procedure in the Student Assignment Handbook on how to label work. It makes everyone's life much easier if they label their work draft and final. And details of that are contained within the Student Assignment Handbook. Assessors, when feeding back, should use the comments button for feedback. So the electronic documents you get should be sent to you in Word format, and you should be able to use the comments button. Occasionally, more feedback will be required, and you can put the additional feedback either into a separate document, perhaps at the bottom of their assignment, or in an email, which they must print and keep, or file and keep. But you should be using the comments button as you go through the document. In addition, you should use the comments button at the top of the page to say whether this is draft or final. So for example, you will use the comments button, it will be comment 1 and it will say draft marked by your initials, in my case that would be SB, on, and the date. And then it is good practice to put please read submit by, and then you give them a deadline, which we've discussed previously. Even if a fantastic piece of work comes back and it's looking great and it's final and there's nothing to add, you should still use the comments button at the top to put in final, complete, marked by SB, on. The simple reason for this is the comments button is unique to you. If we put it anywhere else in the document, for example the footer or the header, it could be put in there by a student. So having each document marked as draft or final makes it very easy at the end of the course for the student to compile their portfolio and for you to check the portfolio. And details are contained within the Assessor Handbook on how to use the comments button in this way. So I'd like you now to complete an action point. Find in the Assessor Handbook the marking grid for Unit 2. Also the 2 essay marking grids. One is for the EQA essay, which is 1.1, and the ethics essay 1.2. Take a few minutes to familiarise yourself with these grids. Please pause the presentation while you do this. So the Unit 2 paperwork consists of a marking grid for Unit 2, the essay marking grid for the EQA, and the essay marking grid for the ethics. The marking grids are filled in when the work is sent to you in draft format, and then return to the student, and it will clearly identify where there may be gaps within their assignments. Also use the comments button, as I've mentioned before as well. The student and assessor signatures are required on the Unit 2 marking grid, but this again can be just a typed signature. So to summarise, there are 5 marking grids in total: the Unit 1 and Unit 2 overview grids, the videoed assessment observation grid, the essay marking grids for EQA and ethics. Other documents include the ILP, which will require a signature, and the portfolio declaration, which will require the student to sign by hand to confirm that it is all their own work. And this will need to be printed by the student, signed, and then scanned in. There are some suggested answers for certain assignments, and we're just going to have a look now at which assignments have suggested answers. The following assignments have answer guidance sheets, and they're contained within the Assessor Handbook. Unit 1 has guidance on the statistical answers. It doesn't contain answers to every question. We are expecting assessors to have a knowledge of what a standardised test is, what a criterion reference set test is. But of course, you also get to watch our video lecture, so any gaps you may have in your own knowledge you can supplement by watching the video. There is also an answer sheet for 1.4, which is the confidence band activity. We don't expect you to have to work that out. In Unit 2, there are suggested answers for the collating evidence activity. That's where they have to analyse the data of 20 candidates. Unit 2, there are suggested answers for the case studies for learning difficulties, that's 3.2, and suggested answers for the case studies for physical and sensory difficulties, and that's 3.3. Professional judgment should be used when marking these assignments. They are only suggested answers, and if your student has made a recommendation which you feel they can back up and there is the evidence for, then you should allow that. I'd like you now to complete an action point. I would like you to find in the Assessor Handbook the Assessor Marking Guidance, and I would like you to read through this very thoroughly. I would like to bring to your attention a few of the points mentioned within this document. First of all, the videoed assessment and the scoring of the test papers we expect to be accurate on first attempt, and you will see that we ask them to achieve 100% accuracy in administering and scoring. If they don't achieve 100% accuracy, they do have to reassess either another candidate or re-administer some of the tests, again using alternative test papers. However, for the other assignments, the student gets a draft submission and a final submission, and we do have a policy which is 1 draft, 1 final. So the student will submit you their assignment, which you mark and feed back, and then hopefully they take on board your comments and make the necessary changes, and it is then returned to you and marked as final. However, if they don't achieve this criteria, if they haven't made the necessary changes, you do have to contact your IQA and she will advise you of the necessary action. Now that could simply be that we do allow them a third attempt, and that would be in the case of just a small piece of information missing or maybe some typos. Alternatively, it may be that the assignment is marked criteria not met, in which case it will be placed in their portfolio and we will revisit it again at the end of the course, and then we will decide if they can resubmit the assignment at that point, or it could be in some cases we give them a viva to test their oral knowledge. But it will very much depend on the quality of the other assignments that they submit. It is really important that if a student doesn't pass the videoed assessment at the first attempt, or if they don't meet the assessment criteria on the second attempt of any of the other assignments, so any of the written documents, you do let your IQA know, and she will tell you of the necessary action to take. I would like you now to complete another action point, this time using the Student Assignment Handbook. Please look at the criteria for submission of work, the portfolio information and the procedure for final submission. Please take a few minutes to look through these documents. It can be a little daunting when you receive your first assignment, which will normally be assignment 1.1 on psychometric testing. And a selection of your first assignments will be co-marked by your IQA or a senior assessor. So this will mean that once you have marked your assignment, it is emailed to either the IQA or senior assessor, who will look at your comments and give you some feedback. This is covered in more detail later in the presentation. What if things go wrong with the videoed assessment? If errors are present in the videoed assessment or in the test marking, please contact your IQA for advice. I have touched upon that before. In most cases, the video will need to be sent to the IQA to look at and to confirm the errors. If further assessment is required, the student will be charged a fee, and you will be able to claim an additional fee based on the marking time that will be required for this additional assessment. I'd like you now to complete an action point. Find in the Assessor Handbook the procedure for supporting at-risk students. I've mentioned at-risk and criteria not met previously, and this is an opportunity for you to read through and to see how we support our students who are perhaps struggling with some aspects of the course. Please pause the presentation to complete this action point. Checking the final portfolios. When a student has completed the course, the portfolio has to be sent to you to check through. And what you will sometimes find is that they may have included the wrong drafts. It's got better since we've been labelling everything using the comments button, but you will need to check through the electronic portfolio to make sure that all assignments are present and clearly marked, and there's very clear guidance on how they should put these into virtual portfolios on their memory stick. You need to make sure the videoed assessment is present and that the relevant grids are signed, including the portfolio declaration, which is the one that must have the signature of the student, which they've signed by hand. I'd like you now to complete another action point. I would like you to find the Student Assignment Handbook and look at the portfolio list to see how the final portfolio should be compiled. We are now going to look at some of the procedures. By the end of the session, you will understand the procedures for internal quality assurance, plagiarism, certification, online learning environment, and you will know how to claim your fees. Students and assessors have access to our online learning environment where each video and the course documents are kept. The course manager will arrange a login for you. I'd like you now to complete an action point. In the Assessor Handbook, I would like you to have a look at the plagiarism procedure. Take a few minutes to read through this. Internal quality assurance. Your IQA will sample a proportion of work from each student. We work with the awarding body, Industry Qualifications, and as this is an accredited course, we have to ensure that we sample work from each student and also each assessor. Some work will be seen throughout the course. This is known as formative assessment, and other assignments will be checked at the end of the course, known as summative assessment. Additional work will be sampled for at-risk students. When your IQA has sampled your work, she will complete an IQA form and this will be sent back to you. You need to read the comments, take on board any of the points she has raised with you. There could be some changes to the assignment, or it could just be some points for further development. You have a place to put your comments down, and then you need to sign it and send it back to the address on the form. We certificate students 4 times a year, but once submitted, the student's assignment portfolio is kept for inspection at our next external quality assurance visit, and that only happens annually. So we publish the certification date roughly 3 months in advance, and we usually say the folder should be with your assessor by X date and with the IQA for a date a few weeks after that to give assessors time to look through the final portfolios. Fee payment. It is your responsibility to invoice Include Ed for your fees. Unit 1 needs to be invoiced when a student is allocated to you. Unit 2 when the student has completed. If the student leaves before graduating, your fee will be pro rata, so it will be based on the marking that you have carried out. And occasionally we have to move students as well, and obviously then it will be prorated as well. Additional fees will be paid for the additional observations or marking. So for example, if your student has to complete another videoed assessment, we would charge the student a fee and you would be able to claim a proportion of that. Trainee assessor support. Once you have accepted the position as an assessor, you'll be required to watch the video for Unit 1, Assignment 1.1, and this will help you mark your first assignment and also fill any gaps in your own knowledge or help you refresh your knowledge. You will also have the option of being mentored by a senior assessor for up to 2 hours, and you can ask your senior assessor anything you want to. It could be about time management, it could be about communicating with your students, it could be a simple query about an assignment or about how you should mark a particular piece of work. However, if it's a particular concern you have regarding a specific student, you should communicate with your IQA. We also need to check the first few assignments that you mark, and you will need to send the first assignment you receive for each of the following assignments to your IQA or a senior assessor for co-marking. Do not feed back to your student before these have been co-marked, sampled and returned. So in Unit 1, we need to look at 1.1, which is the first assignment on educational testing, 2.1, which is the assessment plan, 2.2, which is the rationale, 2.3 and 2.4, which is the actual video and the scoring of the tests, 3.1, which is the case history, and 3.2 to 3.4, which is the analysis of the results and the report. Now, it doesn't have to be for the first student. So let's take an example. If you had Susan submit 1.1 and you got some feedback on that, and then Susan slowed down for a little while, and before Susan had submitted 2.1 and 2.2, Billy submitted those assignments, then you would send us Billy's assignments. It's simply that we need to be able to check these early assignments, and the procedure that's followed should be in this sequence. The student emails the assignment to you, you mark it using the comments button. It is then emailed to your co-marker, that could be the IQA or the senior assessor, who will check your comments and possibly add some more. She then returns it to you, and you need to incorporate any of her comments into your own comments. We don't want students seeing comments from 2 different people. It will then be returned to your student, who will make the changes. She will then return it to you in final format, and you will mark that. Hopefully you'll be able to mark the assignment as final, and then it is sent to the same person that marked the draft, to the IQA or the senior assessor, and she will double check it before you return it to the student as a final copy. It is really important that we do get to see these assignments so that our students are getting consistent support, and we're also supporting and developing your knowledge. And it is hard at the start to know that the exact standards that we require. In Unit 2, there are less assignments that need co-marking. There's just 2. There's 1.1, which is the EQA essay, and you'll need to watch the video before you mark that. There is a marking grid for that, so it is quite straightforward in marking, but there's quite a lot to include, so it's useful for your IQA or the senior assessor to help you with this. And then 2.2, which is where you are summarising specific tests and looking at a couple of them in detail. Other assignments within that unit have answer sheets or guidance sheets, so we don't feel co-marking is needed. However, if you are in any doubt, please do contact your IQA. So what happens next? You'll be contacted to confirm whether you have been accepted as an assessor. If you have, you will be sent a contract for each student allocated to you. You will then need to email your student to introduce yourself, and following that you will need to contact your student every 2 weeks if you haven't heard from them to inquire about their progress. I would like you now to complete an action point. Please find the Student Course Handbook, and this is a different book to what we've looked at before. This contains documents as follows: policies, how to access videos, and set text. Take a moment to look through those documents. I would like you now to complete a final action point as we come to the end of the presentation. Please take time to look back through and to read the Assessor Handbook and the Student Assignment Handbook thoroughly. There are some other documents and information in there that we haven't covered within this training session. All marking grids, answer sheets and other assessor resources can be found at the following link. Thank you for listening.